Hello everyone, today we will enter an ancient story, but full of inspiration and power. This is the story of Abraham, a character of great significance not only in history but also in the spiritual life of millions of people around the world. Let's find out who Abraham is and how his story began. Who is Abraham? Abraham, also known as Abraham, is known as one of the greatest figures in the Bible and is revered in all three major religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam. He is considered the father of nations, the originator of a special covenant between God and humanity. His name, Abraham, has a very special meaning. In Hebrew, it means father of many nations. And indeed, his story is the beginning of a great promise that God has for humanity. Abraham's timeline. Now, let's go back thousands of years, when Abraham was still called Abram. He lived in a time when people were still immersed in tribal life, worshipping many gods. At that time, Mesopotamia, the place where he was born, was the cradle of civilization, where cities like Ur and Haran prospered with agriculture, trade and culture. Abraham was born in Ur, an ancient city in Mesopotamia, now in Iraq. This city is famous for its towering ziggurat temples, where people worship their gods. But in that world, Abraham was a special person. God chose him, not because he was rich or powerful, but because of his faith and his willing heart. Family background. Abraham was born into the family of Terah. His family was descended from Shem, a descendant of Noah, who survived the great flood. Terah, Abraham's father, was an idol maker. However, Abraham was not bound by his father's polytheistic tradition. This shows us that, from a very early age, he had a desire to seek the truth, to seek something higher, greater. Fateful turning point. One day, God called Abraham and gave him a special invitation. God said, "Leave your country, your relatives, and your family, and go to the land that I will show you." Imagine you are living a comfortable life, everything is familiar and safe, and suddenly you are asked to leave everything behind and embark on an unknown journey. That was Abraham's first test, to leave his hometown of Ur and start his journey to the promised land. He obeyed without hesitation, because he believed in God's call. The first promise, descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Imagine, you are living in a society where wealth and prestige are measured by the number of children. Yet Abraham and his wife, Sarah, are old and still childless. Yet God promises Abraham, "I will make you the father of a great nation. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore." What an extraordinary promise! For Abraham, this was not only a comfort, but also a challenge to his faith. How could he believe when the reality before his eyes was completely opposite? Yet, he believed, because his heart was full of faith that God never fails to promise. The second promise, the promised land. In addition to promising him many descendants, God also told Abraham that he would lead him to a special land. That was the promised land. God said, "Lift up your eyes from the place where you are, and look northward, southward, eastward, and westward. All the land that you see I will give to you and your descendants forever." The land was not just a place, but a symbol of assurance, of a sacred covenant between God and Abraham. This is where his descendants would live, grow, and become a blessed people. The third promise, the blessing of all humanity. God did not stop there, but promised that through Abraham, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. This means that Abraham was not just the father of a single nation, but was part of God's grand plan to bring salvation and peace to all mankind. This promise was not limited to Abraham's time, but extended thousands of years later, deeply influencing both history and religion. The deep meaning of the promise. For Abraham, this promise was more than just words. It was a covenant, a sacred promise that God sealed with His presence. Remember, to receive these things, Abraham did not just stand still and wait. He had to follow God's guidance, leave his homeland, overcome trials, and even be willing to sacrifice everything. His faith was the key to the fulfillment of the promise. Testing faith and patience. However, not everything happened quickly or easily. The promise of descendants took decades to come true. Abraham's wife Sarah did not give birth to her son Isaac until she was over 90 years old. At times, people's hearts wavered. Abraham and Sarah tried to conceive a child on their own through Hagar, Sarah's servant. But even when they failed, God kept His promise, reminding them that He never forgets His covenant. In summary, what was God's promise to Abraham? It was a promise of 1. A great seed. 2. A fertile promised land. 3. A blessing for all nations. This promise not only reflected God's love and faithfulness, but also tested Abraham's faith and perseverance. It was through his absolute obedience that the promise became a reality, becoming the foundation of an inspiring story that spans generations. The call and the beginning. When God first called Abraham, His words were clear. Leave your country, your people, and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. Imagine this: you are living a stable life in a place you have known all your life, and then suddenly you have to leave everything, your home, your possessions, your loved ones, to go to an unknown place. Abraham was not given a map, he was not guaranteed safety, but he immediately obeyed, leading his family and his flock to follow God's guidance. This was not just a physical step, but a great spiritual step. It was a letting go of the familiar to trust completely in God's plan, something that not everyone can do easily. The great challenges of the journey. On this journey, Abraham was not immune to great challenges. Each challenge was a test of his faith, and he faced them with extraordinary perseverance. 1. Hunger in the Promised Land. When Abraham arrived at the Promised Land, he did not find the land as rich as he had expected. Instead, he faced famine. The lack of food could have made many people lose faith, but Abraham still believed that God would not abandon him. Even though he had to flee to Egypt, he still returned to the land that God had promised. 2. Conflict with relatives. Not only did Abraham have to face harsh nature, he also had conflicts with Lot, his nephew, over the division of the land. Abraham chose to give the better land to Lot, demonstrating his generosity and faith in God's providence. He believed that what God gave, no one could take away. 3. The sacrifice of Isaac, the ultimate test of faith. And then came the greatest test for Abraham. God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, with Sarah. This was an unbelievable and painful request. Isaac was not only a son, but also the fulfillment of God's promise. Abraham did not object, did not question. He took Isaac up Mount Moriah, prepared everything as God requested. When he raised the knife, God intervened and sent a lamb instead. This was not only a test of faith, but also a proof that God always keeps his promises and never harms those who trust in him. Patience on the journey. The story of Abraham is also a great lesson in patience. From the time God promised him a descendant, Abraham waited nearly 25 years before Isaac was born. During that time, he faced ups and downs, from Sarah's disappointment to bad decisions like having a child with Hagar. But the precious thing is that Abraham always returned to his faith. Abraham's patience was not just waiting in silence, but continuing to walk, continuing to act, and living with the belief that God would complete his plan in time. The results of faith. Abraham's journey of faith is not a story of perfection. It is a story of an ordinary man, with weaknesses, who was willing to put his trust in God. In the end, God kept all his promises. Isaac was born, becoming the father of a great nation. The promised land belonged to Abraham's descendants. And through Abraham, all the nations of the world received blessings. The contemporary significance of this journey. Abraham's journey of faith is not just a biblical story, but a lesson for all of us today. When faced with challenges, do we have the faith to keep going? When the promises of life are not yet fulfilled, do we have the patience to wait? And when things seem to be going wrong, do we have the confidence to believe that God, or destiny, has a great plan for us? The promise of descendants. God promised Abraham that he would have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, even though Abraham and Sarah were both old and childless. This became one of the greatest tests of his faith. Despite going through many years without a child, Abraham waited patiently. And then, at a time when everything seemed impossible, Isaac, Abraham's only son, Abraham, was born. Isaac is the symbol of the promise that God made to Abraham. The boy is a living testament to God's faithfulness and Abraham's patience. Abraham's descendants, through Isaac, will become a great nation, just as God had said. The Promised Land. More than just descendants, God also promised Abraham a land where his descendants would live. This promised land is not just a specific location but also has a profound meaning. It is the place where Abraham's descendants will grow, develop, and become a people blessed by God. Although Abraham's children could not completely take over the land immediately, the promise of the promised land was demonstrated through the gradual process of taking over the fertile land of Canaan. Later, Abraham's descendants, under the leadership of Moses and Joshua, fulfilled that promise. The history of Israel is the clearest evidence of the fulfillment of this promise. Blessings for all nations. The final promise that God made to Abraham was to bless all nations through Abraham. These promises did not only affect Abraham and his descendants but extended to all of humanity. This was fulfilled through the birth of Jesus, who is considered a descendant of Abraham through Isaac. Jesus, in the Christian tradition, is seen as the one who brings salvation to all nations, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham. This is what the Bible calls the blessing of Abraham spreading throughout the world. Fulfillment through the generations. Interestingly, God's promise was not only fulfilled immediately in Abraham's lifetime but also over many generations. After Abraham died, God's promises continued to be kept and fulfilled through his descendants, especially through Isaac, Jacob, Israel, and the 12 tribes of Israel. Even when the Israelites were in exile in Egypt, God kept his promise of land and blessing. And when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, they were finally brought into the land of Canaan, the promised land that God had promised to their ancestors. The story of promise fulfillment in our lives. The fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham is not just a story of the past, but can have a profound impact on each of our lives. God's promises always have the right timing, and sometimes, we have to wait patiently. In times of trouble, we may feel like that promise is too far away, but through Abraham's story, we learn that God never fails, and that he always has a bigger plan for us. Promises and faith today. Today, we can learn from Abraham's story about patience and absolute trust in God. His promise is not just for Abraham or the nation of Israel, but for all of us who have faith and trust in him. When we face challenges, remember that God can make the impossible possible, and our waiting will never be in vain. Conclusion. The fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham is a powerful testament to God's ability to keep his promises, no matter how long it takes. The promise of descendants, the promised land, and the blessing of the nations came true, and it continues to influence us today. In this way, Abraham's story is not only a lesson in history, but also a powerful source of motivation for anyone waiting for the fulfillment of promises in their own lives. Abraham in the 3 major religions. First, let's look at Abraham's influence in the 3 major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham is not only a historical figure, but he is also an important intersection point between these religions. 1. In Judaism. In Judaism, Abraham is the father of the people of Israel, the one whom God chose as a partner in the first covenant. He was the first to believe in a single God. This laid the foundation for the belief in a single God in Judaism. His story of faithfulness to God and obedience has been an endless source of inspiration for Jews in their journey of faith. 2. In Christianity. In Christianity, Abraham is seen as a model of faith. The New Testament frequently refers to him as a man of absolute faith in God. Furthermore, Jesus, whom Christians consider the Messiah, is believed to be a descendant of Abraham through Isaac. Thus, the story of Abraham plays a pivotal role in God's plan of salvation, connecting the promises of the Old Testament with the coming of Jesus. 3. In Islam. In Islam, Abraham, or Ibrahim, is one of the great prophets and a founder of Islam. God, Allah, entrusted Ibrahim with the mission of leading people to the right path of morality and worship of the one God. Muslims regard Ibrahim as one of the pioneers in affirming absolute obedience to God, and he is a person whom Muslims hold in special reverence. They also believe that Ibrahim is the father of the Arab people through his son Ismail. Influence in culture and society. Abraham has left a profound impact not only in religion but also in culture and society. His influence has transcended religious and national boundaries, becoming a symbol of loyalty, confidence and sacrifice. 1. Loyalty and faith. Abraham is a model of loyalty and confidence in something greater than oneself. In modern life, these qualities are still highly valued. Whenever faced with difficulties and challenges, people look to Abraham to remind them to wait patiently, to trust in a good plan even though it is sometimes not immediately visible. 2. Love and sacrifice. Surely you still remember the story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac when God asked. This action is not only a test of faith, but also a testament to unconditional love and great sacrifice. This is a message that has great value in cultures where acts of love and sacrifice have always been honored. 3. Unity among peoples. Abraham is not only the father of the people of Israel, but also the father of many other peoples. This has created a foundation for unity and understanding between peoples and religions, despite differences in views and beliefs. The respect for Abraham and all three major religions is an important factor in building bridges between different cultures. Influence on religious debates and dialogues. Abraham is a key point in many religious debates and dialogues, especially between the three major religions. Despite differences in understanding of Abraham and the stories related to him, the image of Abraham remains a symbol of respect, faith, and obedience. Religious leaders and scholars often use the story of Abraham to promote peaceful dialogue between religions, while promoting common values that all believers of the three religions can share: loyalty to God and the desire to live a moral life. Influence in human life today, the influence of Abraham is not only a religious story or history but also a source of motivation for each individual's life. In a world full of challenges and changes, we can find strength in Abraham's patience, in the belief that God or destiny will fulfill its promises, no matter how long it takes or how difficult the challenges are. Abraham is not only a model of a man who lived out his promise, but also a man from whom we can learn how to face difficulties, how to keep faith, and how to persevere until the ultimate goal is achieved. Conclusion. Thus, Abraham's influence is not limited to one religion or one nation. He is a model of steadfast faith, sacrifice, and patience, values that never grow old. Through his story, we learn that great promises can be fulfilled if we have faith and stay on the right path, despite the challenges and hardship. And that's all we need to know about Abraham's great influence in history and religion. Hopefully his story has brought you valuable lessons and inspiration for your own faith journey. If you like this video and the content we bring, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Please share this video with your friends and relatives to discover more interesting stories about science, history, and human values. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Have a great day.